Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 503 for the 18th of Nissan in a regular year. So I want to ask you guys a question. What do you think is the foundation of a healthy, positive relationship, whether we're talking about between a husband and wife, amongst friends, let's say, or parents and children, or any kind of like relationship that's really intimate, like an intimate kind of relationship? What do you think the foundation of that is? So I'll give you guys a second to think about that. Okay, now we're back. And I'm going to take a big jump here, and I'm going to assume what most of you answered, or what some of you answered anyways. And I'm going to assume that a lot of you guys said that the foundation of an intimate relationship is love. And this is something which has been fed to us by the media, by movies, by Disney, by perhaps even our parents. And what we'll learn today is that the Alter Rebbe in the Tanya actually takes issue with this, and he doesn't agree with us. And we'll see this through his explanation of our relationship with God, because as we learn many times in the Tanya and throughout Torah, our relationship with God is really the most fundamental relationship that we have, and it sort of serves as an archetype and a paradigm for our relationship with all other people, with anybody else in the world. So if the foundation of such an intimate relationship is not love, then what could it be? What is the foundation of these relationships? So if you've been following along these Tanya episodes, this Tanya podcast, you'll know that you'll be able to recall that there are two primary emotions from which all other emotions stem. One of them is love. Indeed, it is love. That's on the right side. But then we have another side. We have the left side. And on the left side is the emotion of fear, of reverence, of awe. These words are all kind of like used in a sense interchangeably. In Hebrew, the translation is yira. And as we will learn in today's Tanya, this emotion, the secondary emotion of fear, of reverence, of awe, is in fact the most foundational one, over and above love. And so before we get into the text, I want to illustrate this through maybe giving a scenario of a husband and wife. Let's say you have the husband who is coming home from work, and he's driving along the highway, and he gets a call from his wife, and his wife says to him, "Oh my goodness, I cannot believe this, but I actually forgot to get candles for Shabbos, and we're totally out of candles. Would you mind stopping at the store and getting us some candles for Shabbos?" And I forgot to mention, let's say this is Erev Shabbos, right? So the husband says, "Sure, no problem." And he says, "Great." He hangs up the phone, and he totally forgets what she just says. And he ends up driving along a totally different area of town. And then he ends up in getting hungry. And then he stops at a gas station to get some food for himself. And he sees out of the corner of his eye a flower shop. And he thinks about his beautiful wife, and he thinks about how much he loves her. And he decides to go and buy her flowers. And then he gets home and he gives her the flowers and tells her how much she loves him. What do you think she's going to say? Maybe she'll appreciate the flowers, maybe she won't, but she most likely will say, "What about the candles? Did you get me the candles?" And then he'll probably realize, oh my gosh, he did not get the candles, right? So this may not be the perfect example, but what this example is serving to illustrate is that in a healthy relationship, in an ideal relationship, it's not enough to have love. And in fact, more than love, really the foundation is this respect, this fear. So maybe it's not perfect, because who's to say that the husband didn't have respect for his wife? Maybe he was just forgetful. But what if he was always forgetful? What if he constantly was neglecting her needs, and instead he was just showering her with loving things. If the foundation of that respect is not there, like let's say he refused to take out the garbage because he didn't think it was something that was so essential. What if he refused to clean up after himself because he just kind of didn't think about it, and all that kind of stuff. But instead, he just constantly was giving his wife flowers and chocolates and things like that. We wouldn't say that this is necessarily the most functional and healthy relationship, especially if these kind of things were really important to his wife. She would definitely feel a sense of disrespect, and vice versa, right? Like if she was constantly not respecting her husband, then that also would not be the most functional thing. So as we'll learn in today's Tanya in the text, respect is really, really, really the foundation of a healthy relationship, especially when it comes to our relationship with God, which again is the most foundational relationships. It's the paradigm of all of our relationships with anybody else. So for context, again, we are in the middle of chapter 41 of Likkutei Amarim. And we've actually been talking about this idea of respect, of fear, and of reverence of God. And we've spoken about this idea, and we're going to continue along these lines today, talking about how the first step in cultivating this reverence, this awe, this fear of God is cultivating a sense of awareness of God, of who God is in relationship to us, and how the mitzvahs specifically that God gave us help us in cultivating this awareness of God that can lead to our fear, to our reverence of him. Yesterday, we were talking about the idea of really cultivating a sense of awe and reverence towards God and thinking of God as this supernal king and really meditating upon this. So now today, the Alter Rebbe is going to begin and say that not only should we meditate upon all of the above, all of that idea, but one should also meditate upon upon how it is that the infinite light of God, which surrounds all the worlds and fills all the worlds. So again, these are these Hasidic terms, Sovev Kol Amin, which means surrounds all the worlds, and Mamale Kol Amin, which fills all the worlds. These are very deep Hasidic ideas that I don't want to get too into right now, but basically how it's the kind of like more transcendent aspect of God and the more immanent aspect of God. So God is everywhere and also in every individual thing. And this is specifically the supernal will. So basically, a person should meditate upon how this light, this infinite light, and this supernal will is vested within the letters and the wisdom of Torah, or of this tzitzis or tfillin. And in reading this Torah, so like let's say if a person is studying Torah, they should have in mind that this supernal will and this light of God is vested inside these letters of the Torah. And if a person is donning tzitzis or tfillin, then again, this infinite light is vested within the tzitzis or tfillin. And in donning these things, he is drawing down God's light to him. Meaning to the part of godliness that comes from above, that is inside of his body, to become encompassed and to become nullified in God's light, in God's blessed light. So remember how we talked about this previously in the Tanya, how every person is connected. Every person, first of all, has a part of God himself within us. This is our godly soul. And so our particular part of our godly soul, when we do a mitzvah, such as tefillin or tzitzis or learning Torah, then this part of us becomes elevated back and becomes nullified back in its source, in God, in the light of God. And then in specific, so now the Alter Rebbe gets more particular here. When we're talking about tefillin, for example, then what happens is the aspect of the person's chokhmah and bina, like his wisdom and understanding of his godly soul, become nullified in the chokhmah and bina of Hashem, of the Ein Sof, which is vested in a particular way in the parsha of Kadesh and the parsha of Vayaya Ki V'echa. So these are two different verses, two different parts of verses which are written inside of the tefillin, and they relate specifically to the chokhmah and bina, to these two intellectual attributes of the soul. And so the whole idea basically is that a person basically is declaring, like they're sort of like making this commitment that they're not going to be using their wisdom or understanding, which is inside of their godly soul, for anything other than God himself. And so too, to have his aspect of das, which again is the third intellectual attribute. This is the attribute, it's commonly translated as knowledge, better understood to be like attachment, this part of us which connects our intellect with our emotions. So to have this too, this aspect of das, to also become nullified and to become encompassed, this das within our godly soul to become encompassed in God himself. And this aspect of das contains within it chesed and gvura, which are the two emotional faculties. Because again, the purpose of das, as I mentioned, is to connect the mind with the heart. And chesed and gvura, which literally means like chesed is like loving kindness and gvura is like restraint or severity. So the way this translates into actual expressed emotions is fear and love, with love being this more like loving kindness aspect, the right side, and fear or awe being on the side of severity or restraint that are within the heart. And so the idea here is to have this das that we've been talking about, which is this connector between the intellect and these emotions, specifically the emotions of love and fear of God, to become encompassed in the supernal das, which encompasses within it the chokhmah and gvura, the chesed and gvura, that is vested within the parsha of Shema and V'haya im Shemua. And this lines up very well, says the Alter Rebbe, with the statement in the Shulchan Aruch, and this comes from Or Chaim chapter 25:5, which says L'she'abed halev ha'moach chulei, to make one's heart and brain subservient to God. So basically, the whole idea here is that in performing these mitzvahs, and specifically here, the Alter Rebbe is really focusing on the mitzvah of tefillin. That's his main focus, but this could apply to many other mitzvahs. We should not just be doing the mitzvahs, like not only should we not do them like just mindlessly, of course not, but we should really have an awareness of what's happening when we do these mitzvahs, and to really cultivate this awareness that through donning the tefillin, we are subjugating our minds, which ultimately translate into our heart, to God, and have our minds and heart become totally nullified to God himself, and to have become totally encompassed in the light of God. And now the Alter Rebbe goes on to describe what one's focus should be in donning tzitzis. So the Alter Rebbe says that in donning the tzitzis, one should have the intention of, as is what is written in the Zohar, to draw down into himself the kingship of God, with this realization that God is the God of all worlds, etc., and to unite this with us through this mitzvah of tzitzis. And this is like the idea of that you should place upon yourself a king. So this is actually a mitzvah from the Torah. This is cited from Devarim chapter 17, verse 15, Som tasim alecha melech, which means set upon yourself a king. So we actually have a mitzvah to appoint upon ourselves a physical king, but this is true also in a spiritual sense, that we are appointing upon ourselves God as our king. And now the Alter Rebbe says that even if, nevertheless, once a person is setting this intention in mind, but they don't find that in setting upon this intention, all of a sudden they feel this deep sense of reverence and awe and fear that is revealed in his heart, nevertheless, as long as the person is accepting it upon themselves, this kingship of heaven, and is drawing upon themselves his yira, this fear of God, this awe of God, as it is revealed in his mind and in his will that is in the mind, and that this acceptance that a person has is true without any doubt. So it's an authentic acceptance. And now the Alter Rebbe gives like a side note here, and he says that it is the nature of the souls of Jews not to rebel against the king, against God. So in other words, of course it's sincere. Of course their acceptance is sincere, even if they're not feeling it overtly in their heart in this expressed way. Then, with all of this means that the Torah that they are learning, or the mitzvah that they're performing, out of this acceptance, and through this drawing down of this yira, this awe into their mind, is called service, total service, just like the service of a servant to his master and to his king. So basically, again, so the basic idea is that what Torah is demanding of us, what the Alter Rebbe is demanding of us, is to think about when we are specifically, this is in reference to the mitzvah of tzitzis, but it's a general thing. Even women don't put on tzitzis, but they still can cultivate this awareness that one is accepting upon themselves the kingship of God and the reign of God and the yoke of heaven. And sure, ideally, in accepting upon ourselves this yoke of heaven and the kingship of God, this should lead a person to like this sense of real dread and awe and like fear of God. Like if we really realized what it is that we were declaring, and in those moments, we would surely like tremble, and be really like amazed and like, wow, would be like awestruck. But that doesn't happen often. And so the Alter Rebbe is saying that even if that doesn't happen, even if we don't feel it in an emotional way, we shouldn't be concerned, because as long as we cultivate this awareness within our minds, it's fine and it's authentic. And how do we know that it's authentic? Because the nature of every Jew is not to rebel against God. And the nature of every Jew is to accept God's kingship totally and 100%. So we can rest assured, again, that even if we're doing these things that sometimes feel like lip service, like they don't really feel so authentic, and we're like, I'm not feeling it, we don't have to worry about that, because we really, obviously, we want to try to cultivate that emotional feeling as best possible. But the main thing is really to try to use our intellects to really cultivate the awareness. That's really our job. And whatever happens emotionally after that, that's kind of like, let's see what happens, and we can rest assured that no matter what, the authentic true us is the one that the true Jew inside of us does want to serve God and does ultimately want to connect with him, which makes our service sincere, whether we feel it to be that or not. Now, with all of that being said, and all of that focus on fear and reverence of God, the Alter Rebbe now pivots a little bit, and he talks about service of God that is based solely on love and what all of that is about. So the Alter Rebbe says that while this is true of fear, that when we have a sense of fear or reverence for God, this makes our service true and authentic. This is not the case if a person learns Torah or if a person keeps mitzvahs just out of love. Because meaning to say, what do we mean to serve God out of love? Meaning that the purpose of the reason why the person does Torah and mitzvahs is in order to cleave to God, and through his Torah and mitzvahs, then we cannot say that this is the service of a servant. And then the Alter Rebbe brings a couple of citations to support this, where the first one is from Shmot, chapter 23, verse 25, where it says, "Ve'avadatem et Hashem Elokechem v'gomer," which literally means, and you shall serve God, your God, meaning to say that we're supposed to serve God in a way of like a servant. Like Eved is a servant in Hebrew, which comes from the same word, just like it does in English, as service, ve'avadatem. And then another verse here, this time from Dvarim, chapter 13, verse 5, where it says, "Ve'oto tavodu v'gomer," that you should serve God. So again, it's this idea of service of God is really essential. And now the Alter Rebbe here cites the Zohar in Parshas Bahar, where it talks about an ox, and it talks about how in order for an ox to become useful for the world, one first has to place a yoke upon them. And this is similar to a human being, how first of all, they must submit to the yoke of the kingdom of heaven in order to be considered useful. And in order to have holiness rest upon them, they must have this submission. And if the submission is not there, then a holiness cannot rest upon the person. So again, it's like an ox. If we want to make an ox useful, like let's say you're having an ox do some different work for you and stuff like that, you need to place a yoke on this ox. Otherwise, they're just going to run wild and they're not going to be able to do what you need to do. The first step is to put that yoke upon them. Similarly, with a person and serving God, the first step is have that yoke of heaven upon you. Have that sense of subservience before God. And now here, the Alter Rebbe cites the Rea Mehemna on page 111b, where it says something that seems to bring another dimension to this, where it says that a person has to have two aspects and two levels in the way that they connect with God. The first aspect is that they need to be on an aspect of being a servant. And the second aspect is being on a level of a son. So a servant is alluding to this idea of serving God out of fear, out of awe. And the level of a son is serving God out of fear. So it seems like love is really important, right? Because we need to have both. We need to have fear and we need to have love. However, says the Alter Rebbe, and this is how he concludes this section, is he says that while there is a son who is also a servant, this is possible that you can have a son who's also a servant. Nevertheless, you can't get to this level without first coming to a sense of supernal fear, supernal yira, as is known to those who know. So this is where the Alter Rebbe ends off here, and it's something that's going to be explored further in the Tanya. But for now, just to understand that basically, while it is possible to have both, it is possible to have both fear and love. It needs to start with fear. So even if somebody is going to have this like really deep relationship with God that encompasses both fear and love, you can't just have the love without the fear. You must start with the fear. And in order to get to that love, we need to come to not just regular fear. We actually need to come to something which is called supernal fear or supernal awe. And we'll discuss what this means later in the Tanya. And that will lead eventually to the love level. So once again, just translate this into regular human relationships. This is true as well, that while love is definitely a big aspect of a relationship, and ideally we do want that to be there, we need to start with respect, and the respect is really that foundation. So that's it for today, and we will continue along these lines tomorrow, and I will speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.